Hi, this is Jonathan. Today I'm going to talk about some of the things that I've learned about unit planning and the ways that I've incorporated into some of the lessons that I have planned for this month. First of all, some of the initial planning for this unit that I did, I think was pretty good. I think one of the main things that I learned this month was some of the terminology to use to describe some of the things that I've already been doing kind of instinctively all along, which is really important because I never really thought about them in concrete terms. It just seemed like the most logical thing to me, and because of that, I think there were a lot of places where I let certain things slip through the cracks because I wasn't really monitoring it the way I've kind of learned to through the things we've learned this month. So some of the revisions that I put into the lesson plans that I wrote for the module, and also just kind of the way I've started thinking about lesson planning in general, the big ones, I suppose, are incorporating Web 2.0 and technology into the classroom more. I think that it is pretty important in a way that I kind of didn't think it was before. I'm really starting these young kids off with one of their first impressions of what the internet is and how they can use it. So if I can present it to them as a tool for their learning, like a better way for them to learn about things, they're already using the internet at home. So if I teach them how to use it constructively, it's going to help them both in the classroom, in their future, and just in their free time, I hope. The integrating more multicultural perspectives into lessons is something that I've always tried to do in theme topics, but those kind of lend themselves to ideas of multicultural perspectives more easily than, say, math or phonics. But that doesn't mean that I shouldn't try to integrate them together more. There's definitely times where I could use some of the things we're learning in theme that are more multicultural in math, or for phonics. Some of the writing projects that we do, even if it's simple sentences, I can encourage the kids to try to relate it back to some of the multicultural perspectives we've been talking about during theme time. So it's a holistic approach to kind of a number of subjects, but I think by incorporating them all together, it makes every part of it stronger, and definitely the sum of all the parts much stronger than it would be if I wouldn't incorporate them. One of the things that I really liked in this module was learning about the I do it, we do it, you do it together, you do it alone process of lesson planning, which is something that, again, just intuitively I had been doing for quite a long time, but I never thought about in concrete terms. And now thinking back to some lessons, realizing that I had maybe missed out on a step, or maybe if I would have thought them through more concretely, my sequencing could have been better, as opposed to, I do it, you do it together, then we do it together. Having a kind of flow for how it should go is really helpful. I guess what parts of the unit plan emerged as critical to its implementation? Scaffolding and sequencing, definitely. Again, it's something I've always kind of done, but I've learned more techniques and more terminology, and I think that's the most important thing, especially for kids this age. And the way that scaffolding and sequencing isn't necessarily completely linear, but can kind of double back on itself through review and revision, and having a goal for the end of a unit and trying to achieve it that way, as opposed to trying to have every lesson be from one point to one point to the next point to the next point, but instead building slowly, repeating back, and kind of spiraling forward until by the end of the unit the students should have a pretty solid conception of what I hope they will, and making sure that we're not skipping any steps in between. But again, students are all different, and I don't want to skip over any students who maybe didn't totally understand a concept on the first lesson. So that's why I think review and revision and sequencing and scaffolding are both really important. The idea of formative and summative assessments has also been really interesting and really important. Again, these are things that kind of come naturally, but when you think about them directly, you realize that it is something that should be put into every lesson plan, and formative assessments especially, I think. Knowing that your students have kind of understood the concept is great. But when you have more concrete ways to kind of analyze how they're doing with it, to see if they're progressing from one stage to another throughout learning about a topic, just having little stops along the way, little checkpoints where if the student can do this, I feel comfortable that they have kind of succeeded in understanding this part and they are ready to move on to the next part. And while we might, in the course of a class, have to move on to the next part before some students have fully proven that they can pass a formative assessment on a previous part, that's where the doubling back and revision comes into play, where they might be a little bit lost on the next step of the concept, but we're still going to be going back to old concepts and repeating those formative assessments and summative assessments until I'm confident that every student has a solid working understanding of the topic before we completely move on past it. Let's see. I think some of the project-based learning stuff that always comes back is really important. The student-centered learning, trying to keep the kids engaged, thinking about the flow of a lesson and especially the timing of a lesson, how to keep things from getting bogged down or getting slow or getting drawn out, and instead thinking about the pacing, how I will be making changes every few minutes in a logical way that will keep us from staying on one activity for too long, which for 4 and 5 year olds, a few minutes, 5 minutes can already be a little bit too long on some things. So planning it out logically, reviewing it, incorporating more useful internet resources, and trying to take multicultural perspectives and incorporate them in a productive way into lessons where it doesn't seem like they're a natural fit. Those are some of the biggest things I took away from this lesson. But overall, I've been doing this for a long time, so planning out a lesson, I guess I've just become a little bit lazy about it. Going back to thinking about what if I were to really plan out every step of a lesson, and realizing that the heart is there, and it's kind of the things I intend to do, and usually the kind of unspoken process that I go through when I'm planning out a unit or a lesson. But when it's really down on paper and really thought about concretely, 21st century skills, does it satisfy Bloom's taxonomy? Really breaking it down like that. Going back to thinking about every bit of minutia in a lesson plan has really opened me up to some of the things I've forgotten over the years. So I'm really excited to go back and use some of these skills in lessons to come, and I think this was a really, really beneficial module for me. Thank you for all the things that I've learned, and I'm sure my students would thank you if they could, because I think their lessons from here on out are going to be better than they were before. So thank you very much for listening.